to wear what tiara when? And how do the ladies divvy out these impressive pieces of jewelry within their various collections? Because believe it or not, there's a lot of politics, you could say, involved in wearing a tiara. So, hello everyone, welcome to Royal Fashion News. My name is Brittany. Today is Tiara Tuesday, and we are talking about how the various royal families decide who gets to wear what tiara when. It's actually sort of an interesting discussion because there is such a vast collection, especially within the Brits. Some things we've seen, some things we haven't seen. And so to divvy out and decide who gets what is actually a rather interesting question, and one that changes between the various families. There's sort of two tracks we'll go into about what people do. Some have a lot, some have little. And so as they manage these, it's just interesting to discuss and figure out, or even sometimes guesstimate who will get what next. Because obviously, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is out for until at least the fall, if not later. But the interesting question is, will we see her in a new tiara at some point this year? I've had some ideas about what tiara I would love to see her in. What will Camilla bust out? And will the Brits change how they dole out the tiaras? It's a very interesting question. And so I'm so excited to explore tiara politics because there's a lot of tiara politics and sharing you guys with a bit, at least what I understand of who gets what tiara when, because this is a lot of observation. Obviously, they don't get into much detail about the various tiaras, but there is a hierarchy. There is the blood connection as well between the various royal families. And so we will discuss all of this today in my glorious floral tiara-ish thing that I got in Krakow, Poland. So, if you guys haven't been to Royal Fashion News before, like I said, my name is Brittany, and I talk about all things related to royal fashion. So, if you guys are interested in subscribing, I would love to have you back. And this is Tiara Tuesday, where we talk about so many things related to tiaras. And this is a video I've thought about for a while because I've had a couple of people ask me, I was like, well, how do they determine who gets to wear a particular tiara? Because there are some collections that are incredibly vast and some that are incredibly small. And so, how do they figure this out? Are you demoted, maybe, or there are certain tiaras you don't get access to? How does this all work? So, let's just start off with some just key phrases here. One of them is a starter tiara. So this is a tiara in particular that a young woman wears when she's first either starting to wear them and she's a blood royal, or if she's first marrying into a royal family. So for example, Catherine's Cartier Halo tiara would be considered a starter tiara. It started on Princess Margaret and Princess Anne as well, so she has a great track record there. We also had the Swedes who had some really interesting starter tiaras. Crown Princess Victoria had her 18th birthday tiara, which was very flimsy. I was like, "Oh, that's just sort of a sad little thing that she has." Her sister got something I think a bit better, which was this aquamarine tiara that some have labeled the Cyclops. And I don't entirely blame them for that because it looks a little bit like that. She actually wore it across her forehead one time, a little bit of that shape. But it's this gorgeous aquamarine stone, and it's actually been in the family for many, many years and surrounded by diamonds. And so that was sort of her starter tiara. And so I feel like this starter label is really for ladies who have a vaster collection they'll have available to them going forward. So we'll shelve talk a bit of some of the other royal ladies, but when ladies first marry into the family or are first starting to wear one, sometimes they'll get these starter tiaras to begin with that tend to just get bigger over time as they get further into their tenure as a royal. And I just want to clarify as well, because I've heard this time and time again, but it is false, which is that royal ladies cannot wear a tiara until they are married. That is not true. So we have examples of this being Catherine Amalia, Princess Anne, Princess Margaret, Princess Elizabeth in Belgium, Princess Ingrid Alexandra in Norway, Catherine Amalia is from the Netherlands, and obviously Crown Princess Victoria, Princess Madeline have all worn tiaras before their marriage. And so usually it's after 18, if you are a blood royal within the family, that you will start wearing a tiara. And so the story that you don't start wearing a tiara until after your marriage, I think only really applies to perhaps the aristocratic set in the UK and some other countries. And they do that because usually they only wear the tiara on their wedding day and maybe a time or two after for a specific event or maybe a photo shoot, something like that. They just have few opportunities to wear it after that point. But when it comes to the broader royal world, 18 is the day. And even Queen Maxima, before she married her husband, actually did wear a tiara. So there's even instances where royal ladies in the lead up to their wedding, who are actually not blood royals, who are marrying into the family, actually do get to wear a tiara before then. So, yes, these starter pieces usually start after 18, and then the tiaras tend to get grander over time, especially if you are in the main line of succession. And when it comes to choosing that particular tiara, usually it seems like the ladies are given a choice among a couple. So we've had this report from Harry in his book Spare that Meghan was shown a couple and she got to choose one. And then in the case of Catherine Amalia, her mother gave her a couple of options to choose from for her first tiara appearance, and she chose the one that was actually the tiara her mother wore on her wedding day. But in other countries, this will not be the case. You're sort of given the one you're given because essentially there's not enough to choose from. So this isn't the case where there are a lot of options on the table. And so are given, let's say, three or four, and then they get to choose one of those. And they may go back and get to delve into others, as in the case of with the Netherlands or in the UK, where you're choose one and that's your one and that's it. So again, all depends on the different families. There's also the big guns. So, the big guns is a term that is defined as the largest tiaras within the collection, the grandest, sometimes the most historic. Those are reserved for the queen exclusively. And the vast majority of the time, that is pretty much how it goes. There's some exceptions, but I will say, for example, in the UK, most of the queen's tiaras are big gun tiaras pretty much. And so she wears the vast majority of them. So it's a bit different with the Brits. But let's say with the Dutch. When it comes to the Dutch, there are a couple reserved for the queen. The sapphire Mellorio tiara, which Maxima wore on the day of her husband's inauguration. You also have obviously the Stuart tiara with the big Stuart diamond in it. There was also the Dutch ruby Mellorio tiara, which many people thought was just reserved for the queen, but Maxima wore it when she was the Princess of Orange. And so that's sort of a bit different. The other would be the Württemberg ornate pearl tiara. Those would be the 3/4 that I would say are exclusively reserved for the queen in the Dutch collection. And of course, for the Swedes, the big guns would be the Brazanga tiara, which has only been worn by the queen, really only been worn by the queen. I would say the cameo also takes that place, although it was worn by Crown Princess Victoria during her wedding. Luxembourg sapphire tiara that has been worn by other members of the family, but it's pretty much just worn by the queen. And of course, other royal families have similar things as well. These are tiaras, which are usually the grandest in the collection that are worn exclusively by the queen. Now, there are some exceptions to this. I would say in Denmark, the exception would be the Dutch ruby puree tiara, which belonged to, at the time when she first married in, Crown Princess Mary. It's one of the grandest within the Danish collection, but Queen Ingrid had left that particular tiara and set to Crown Prince Frederick for use of his future wife. And so that one, although it was grandest, although it could be definitely considered a big gun, was in exclusive use by the crown princess. The queen never actually wore that particular tiara. So it's very interesting. And we do also have another exception in the Greek royal family, where Crown Princess Marie Chantal wore Queen Sophie's diamond tiara, which is this massive, massive thing. And many speculated, and it could be true, that maybe at one point this one was considering being come up for auction or something like that. And Marie Chantal, whose father is a billionaire, actually ended up purchasing it, which is why she wears it, and the Queen of Greece has not. So it's sort of interesting to consider these different things, but there's ones that are exclusively of use to the Queen, and those are labeled the big guns. So when it comes to the rest of the collection, who gets to wear what? What is the hierarchy here within the families? Of course, the number one consideration always is who is first in line to the throne. So when it comes to, let's say, the Brits, when it comes to the vault, after Camilla, Catherine would get first choice. Same in the Netherlands. So Queen Maxima gets first choice. Her daughter, Princess Amalia, gets second choice. And then her middle daughter, Alexia, will get a choice after that. But the Netherlands is also the interesting case because we have the former Queen Beatrix around. And she has abdicated her throne, and as is tradition within the Dutch royal family. And so because of that, she obviously also gets a choice. So I would imagine the order in that case would go Maxima, Amalia, Beatrix, and then Alexia. That's what I think the order there would go in. And then lower than that would be the king's sisters-in-law. They would get the choice after that because hierarchy does matter in these particular situations. Now, in the case of, let's say, the Swedes, when it comes to order of hierarchy, we have obviously Queen Sylvia. Crown Princess Victoria would get to pick next out of the collection. Now, she's excluded from the big guns, but she can pick among the other pieces within the collection. I think she would get first choice after Sylvia. Now, next could technically be Princess Sophia, who married the king's son, Prince Carl Philip. However, the other stipulation when it comes to who gets access to what when is blood. So the king also has a younger daughter, Princess Madeline. So I imagine within the order of hierarchy, it actually maybe potentially be Sylvia, Victoria, Madeline, and then Sophia. Because again, within royal families, blood does matter. And the blood royal has a deeper connection to these jewels because they belong to their grandmother, great grandmother, great great grandma, what have you. And so they may get access to things even before, let's say, somebody who is technically married to somebody up higher in the line of succession. Now, I can't think of another family where that particular birth order is the key there. So we have girl, boy, girl. Can't really think of any other family right now off the top of my head that really has that kind of same order. You could say that Belgians may have, but also in the Belgian situation, Queen Matilda has a small connection to pull from. So she pretty much just goes with the nine provinces tiara. But her sister-in-law, Princess Astrid, married one of the Habsburgs, and so she has access to some of the Habsburg collection, Princess Astrid. So she can pull from that collection, so she doesn't always have to pull from the Belgian collection. And so that is a case as well. And then there is the younger brother, Prince Laurent, and so he would perhaps his wife would maybe get a couple of choices after we have obviously Queen Matilda, Princess Elizabeth, and then, maybe Princess Astrid and then maybe Princess Claire. So yeah, you have these complicated dynamics. And so the question is, how do you always manage these? Now, another good situation to consider here is actually the one between potentially Meghan Markle and Princess Eugenie, because there has always been a rumor that Meghan Markle actually wanted to wear an emerald tiara. Now, this has been supposed to be the Vladimir tiara, but it could actually have been the one Princess Eugenie wore on her wedding day. Now, in this situation, let's say Meghan got to choose first and Meghan chose the emerald one, but then later Eugenie told Her Majesty, no, I want to wear that tiara. Then it might be a situation where Her Majesty's like, well, Eugenie's blood, Meghan is not. Ergo, Eugenie gets this choice over Meghan. And though we don't know if that's necessarily true, that definitely is a huge possibility. But there's also two different ways that the royal families seem to function based on what we see. One is sort of the British model, you could say, and one is more the, I want to say Scandinavian, but it's more of the Swedish Dutch model. And so in the British model, pretty much what happens is you are given access to a particular tiara or two or three, and that's it. There's no sharing, there's no trading or anything like that. And so we can almost guarantee every time we see Catherine, she will be wearing the Queen Mary's Lover's Knot tiara, which can sort of get a little dull after a while, although it is a gorgeous tiara. It's just fun with the, I would say, Swedish slash Dutch model, where they are more willing to share the various tiaras. And so there's not, except for the big guns, and maybe there are one or two other reserved for maybe for family members from time to time. Pretty much everybody can pick between the main sets. You obviously get to pick as other people before you pick theirs first. You can go down the line and then eventually say, oh, I want this one. And so you're not just stuck with one particular tiara, because it kind of gets dull when somebody's stuck with one particular tiara. That's why I love the Swedes and the Dutch, because you don't know what somebody's going to show up wearing because they have access to so much. Now, in the Norwegian and Belgian families, this is a bit different because they have such a small collection that they really can't trade that much. Crown Princess Mette-Mara is relegated to really two tiaras, and that's the amethyst necklace and her daisy bandeau tiara. She also has worn the Queen Maud pearl tiara, an alternative version of that, but she really hasn't worn anything else within the Norwegian collection, but there's just not that much of a collection to begin with. And so there's just not that much to choose from. So when it comes to the Belgians as well, there's just not that many tiaras. And so when it comes to what, for example, Princess Elizabeth can choose, they actually ended up purchasing a tiara for her, which made sense because there's just not not that much. She's also been seen wearing the Wolfer's tiara. When it comes to Princess Ingrid Alexandra, they actually purchased a tiara for her, but it was one actually connected to the family. Not sure now if they purchased it or just kind of went in her direction, which was very sweet because they just don't have that many to choose from. So it's a really pretty piece. So it's a Princess Ingeborg's Bergeron circle tiara. It's very delicate. It's very great for a beginning royal in many ways. And so it was like that they were able to bring it back into the main line of the family and give it to Princess Ingrid Alexandra. Again, it may be sold, it may be given. I'm not exactly sure on the details, but it was lovely that I was able to give it to her because she is going to be the future queen of Norway. And so it makes sense given that the Norwegian collection is so small that she gets something that she can wear pretty readily. And so when it comes to Catherine, obviously she pretty much wears the Queen Mary's lover's knot. She also has access to the lotus flower tiara, which she busts out from time to time. And of course, drum roll please, the biggest thing she wore was, of course, Strathmore Rose tiara, which many of us weren't even sure existed anymore, weren't sure what state was in, but she wore it. It's honestly a bit more of a starter piece because it's rather small, but the historic significance of it and having not seen it in almost 100 years, it's very exciting to see that particular tiara. But again, it all depends on what the ladies get access to. Some ladies get access to lots, some ladies get access to little. Again, it all depends on the family. But I think what's so fun about the Dutch and the Swedes and a couple other families here and there is that you're just never sure what they'll show up in because there's just so many options available to them. And of course, as well, what's to consider is that sometimes there is a particular tiara purchased for a royal. So obviously we covered Princess Elizabeth, Princess Ingrid Alexandra. We also had the case in Sweden of Princess Madeline being given the modern fringe tiara that was originally given to her mother. And Madeline started wearing that quite a bit and was eventually given to her on her wedding. So that became her personal property. So she can wear that one whenever she wants. Her children could wear it, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's one she personally owns. I think actually Princess Sophie also owns a tiara individually as well. It's sort of unclear because sometimes they're just not clear exactly who owns what, but it seems to be one personally owned by Sophie. There's a couple that are personally owned by Anne. So it all depends on the family. And obviously, Princess Margaret purchased the Baltimore tiara, which ended up having to be sold, but she had a couple other from the British collection, which we all believe ended up back in the British vaults. And so the tiara I wanna see Catherine in that we haven't seen in a really long time that I would think would look amazing on Catherine is a turquoise tiara, the only one within the British collection, belonged to Princess Margaret, and I think it would look amazing on Catherine. I'd really love to see that on Catherine. And there's some situations as well where there's a tiara really reserved for one member of the family who holds a particular role. The one I'm really thinking of in this case is Sweden. So Crown Princess Victoria is the main one who can wear the Baden fringe. There's sort of been a rumor, sort of confirmed, not confirmed, that that's exclusively technically for use of the Crown Princess. Now, she decides not to wear it. Her mother or one of her aunts has worn it, but neither Madeline nor Sophia have worn that tiara. And so it seems to be one that's sort of exclusively initially for Victoria's use, and if she's not using that one, then she uses something else. And you think as well the historicness of the occasion. So when her father was celebrating his 50th jubilee, she wore the Baden fringe, which I think to me sort of signifies because they send so many messages through their jewelry that wearing the Baden fringe signifies that this is a particular historic tiara connected to the crown princess, whoever that happens to be. So even though other members of the family have worn it, it's really sort of reserved for Victoria, and she's the one who wears it on very historic occasions. Now, there's also tiaras as well that were worn more just by the blood royals, although there's a lot of ladies in Sweden, so this one's kind of hard to determine. When it comes to what Sophia has been able to wear, she mostly exclusively wears the wedding tiara they purchased for her with all the little toppers, which I'm starting to get a little bored by. But when it comes to the other tiaras within the family she's worn the 6 button, the 4 button, the amethyst, but not the conant tiara, because that one has a particular connection to the king's mother. And so it seems to be one that's sort of reserved just for the blood royals of the family. So because it is a family piece of jewelry in a different way than maybe some of the other pieces in the collection, that it has such a historic connection to an individual person that it's really important for the family that it needs to be worn by a member of the family. So that's sometimes how things go. And when it comes to Denmark as well, the ladies also don't have access to many tiaras. So before becoming queen, Queen Mary had access to really two pieces initially. And so that was her wedding tiara and the Danish ruby puree tiara set. And then she purchased her own tiara, which was essentially called an Edwardian tiara. It has diamonds and rubies in it. It's not very impressive. And then she also borrowed another tiara. And this is the same case with Princess Marie, who was given one historic tiara from the collection to use. And it was obviously on loan as well, because in the previous instance, the Prince Joachim's former wife, Princess Alexandra, was gifted a tiara, and through the divorce proceedings, she ended up with ownership of it. So we're not sure exactly how that ended up, but somehow Queen Marguerite didn't quite word something correctly somewhere, because that tiara ended up being Alexandra's possession. And so the ladies have been relegated to borrowing too. So Princess Marie does have the Princess Dagmar's tiara, floral tiara, that she was loaned on her wedding day that she still continues to use. But she has two others that she has been part of fashioning and are hers to borrow from the various jewelers. The floral Danica tiara, but she's only worn that once. There's also a new one she's worn recently, which seems to have connections to France. And so it's the Newt's Claire's tiara, which she debuted in 2018. And so it has been worn by her. And we may see her wear this more, as the jeweler has stated that it is at her disposal if she would like to borrow it for a certain occasion. And Queen Mary had the same situation with the Midnight Tiara, which actually I personally really like, which features diamonds and moonstone berries nestled along leaves of gold, rose gold, white gold, and oxidized silver. That is a quote from the court jeweler. I just think that tiara is really pretty. I just do. I think it's really unique and interesting looking. As I feel like it has this kind of floral headpiece, sort of like mine, but more like ancient Greece or something. That's what I kind of love about it. But as she's become queen, there will be more that Mary has access to. But at the same time, as well, there's a couple that are still personally owned by Queen Marguerite. And so it'll be interesting to see if at one point her and Mary both wear ones that are technically reserved for the queen. So we shall see how that ends up playing out. We had the Pearl Poirier tiara, which Mary recently wore in the Emerald Puree tiara set as well. And so there may be more that she has access to, but more also that are technically owned by Queen Marguerite. So it'll just be very interesting, because you do have that personal owned feature as well as ones that are owned by the state. And most tiaras within most families, because they don't want to get hit with such inheritance taxes that they don't have access to some of their family jewels anymore, usually create a trust or foundation. So the tiaras are never individually owned, usually by the king or queen. They're actually owned by the trust. And the trust is managed by whoever the monarch is. And the monarch can then divvies out who gets what when. And so that is a way for them to keep these collections together, because otherwise they end up sometimes going on the chopping block. So it is rather interesting to see how all of this plays out. But of course, it all depends on who sits on the top. Some monarchs can be very generous, some not. But the interesting thing about the Brits as well is, because there are so many what you could call big gun tiaras within the collection, there are very few that go outside the monarch. And we do also have cases as well when it comes to Princess Eugenie, that sometimes they said that you get a tiara and you get that tiara for life. Think when it comes to Eugenie, I don't think she'll really get access to anything else but perhaps her mother's tiara, the York tiara. It is still rather interesting that Sarah Ferguson got another tiara, because there's tons within the British collection, as we've seen. And so I imagine if there's a tiara event Eugenie will ever go to, much like her sister, Princess Beatrice, she will end up wearing her mother's tiara, because I think that was a one time loan. Now, interesting about Meghan Markle, if she had stayed within the family, she might have started off with the Queen Mary's bandeau, but she could have graduated to something grander over time, maybe even the turquoise. Who knows? But it all depends. But all this to say is that when it comes to tiaras, if you are queen, it's good to be queen. And if you are the wife of the next in line, it's good to be queen too. But all the other members of the family really do have opportunities to wear some gorgeous and unique pieces, but it all depends on how much the family has. And so, guys, I hope you found this video interesting. All the tiara politics, because there's just so many different designations. I hope you really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you soon. Bye.
We don't count the carats, we count the centuries.